So now we will go for last few topic, which is I think Azure Backup. Let me just write those points.
Amar, I have one question actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, you have mentioned Azure Traffic Manager, and I
Mhm.
have read application front door gateway. So, what is the difference?
Okay. So Azure Traffic Manager to manage the global traffic, right? So you using that you can manage the global traffic. But if you want to achieve CDN type of things as well, so you can use for Azure Front Gateway for that.
CDN. I didn't understand what is CDN.
So basically, for if you want to use content delivery network, so for that you can use Azure Front Gateway.
Okay. So this is also to the global load balancing.
Yes, it's do the traffic load balancing basically. So it is working on the caching system.
Okay.
So we are going to talk about Azure Backup, and we will also talk about Azure Site Recovery today, and we will also talk about um, auto scaling, and then we will talk about Azure Database, Azure DB, and in this Azure DB we are going to talk about Azure SQL Services. So let's talk about them, Azure Backup and other thing. Okay. So what do you understand by backup? What could be the backup? So maybe in Azure you just want to take the backup, right? Backup of your virtual machine, okay, or the data which is in virtual machine, C drive, D drive, etc. So how you can take the backup, okay? So basically for that we are going to use Azure Backup. So if you want to take the backup of your data so that you can protect your data, whether that is on premises data or maybe that is on cloud. So basically for that you can go for the Azure Backup. So I will talk about that. What is Azure Backup? Just give me a minute. Let me take a pen. So let's discuss about Azure Backup. So basically what is Azure Backup? If you want to protect your data, backup is used for what? Backup we use for the protection of data. When we say protection, so if any case um, data got corrupted, or the data which is stored somewhere, okay, that storage got corrupted or there is problem on the storage, so for that we can use the backup. So we can say that backup is for protection of data. That data could be anywhere. It could be on premises or it could be over the cloud, okay, within the machine. So it could be under the VM, where your data is residing. So for that, what you can do, you can use the Azure Backup. You can take the backup into some kind of storage, which is known as a uh, which is known as a storage vault. Okay, so Azure store into the storage vault, you can store the backup. Okay, so when you want to create a backup uh, any particular machine, either you can take the complete backup of the machine, or a specific drive you can take the backup. Okay, so for that you can use Azure Backup functionality. Azure Backup functionality, okay, using which you can protect your data and you can take the backup of your on-premises and cloud-based VM, or the data which is stored within the VM. But when we use Azure Site Recovery, this is to take the backup of particular VM. But sometimes we could have the scenario like we have one site in Azure which is created in East US. Okay, and this, let's say this entire data center or this entire site got deleted, and now we just need to recover entire site. Okay, so for that we can use Azure Site Recovery Services. This is what this site recovery is going to use for you know, for complete recovery of your site. Okay, so when I say complete recovery of site, so in the site we could have a VMs, or we could have a physical server, whatever it would be. So all entire site is going to recover. Okay, and for site recovery, what we are going to use, we are going to use Azure Site Recovery Services. So what are the benefits we get when we are using backup or maybe site recovery? Basically, why we should use Azure instead of storing backup on premises? What are the benefits you get when you are taking the using Azure Backup Services or Azure Site Recovery Services? What other benefit you get which you would not get on premises? Can you think? Okay, so let me just talk about that. When you are using Azure Backup or Azure Site Recovery, so basically you are storing that data into one account which is known as a recovery service vault. So you would be using recovery service vault where you would be storing the data. Okay, this is what to is this is recovery service vault used to store backup data. It is going to store data of uh, backup. And if you talk about this one, okay, so this can store the backup of data for what? It can store the backup of data your infrastructure as a services. If you have using infrastructure as a services, that means it can store the backup of VM. Okay, or whether you are using any other thing. For example, you are using any SQL based database as well. It can store the backup data for VM, or it can store the backup data for SQL databases. Okay, this is the recovery service vault is the kind of account. This is kind of a storage account where you would be putting your backup. Okay, like earlier we talk about blob storage account, right? Where we just create what? Where we just create a you know, any file, we upload the file, any kind of file we can upload there. Same way here on the recovery service vault, we can store any kind of data, whether that is related to VM or that is related to SQL database, we can store data there. So this is kind of account, and this account has a data limit basically. So when you are creating a recovery service account, so it is going to give you a space that in this account you can store 50 GB of data. But let's say you require more than that 15 GB. So it has a capability to manage the storage automatically. So suppose if your recovery service vault account you have taken for 15 GB and later you just want to increase that, so yes, that is also possible that you can increase that. So let's say this was the VM. For that you are taking the backup and putting into the recovery service vault. Okay, so which is you have taken a 15 GB services, but later on this particular VM which was your on it as a infrastructure services, the data is more than 15 GB, and that you just again want to store into the recovery service vault. So yes, you can achieve that. So if you are using Azure backup or Azure based backup solution, so you would be getting some benefits. What are the benefits? Let me just write here. What are the advantages you are going to get when you are taking any kind of backup services from the Azure or cloud based backup services? Okay, so I'm writing over here the advantages when you are taking the backup on the cloud based backup advantages. So what are the
I think your screen is stuck. Actually.
not visible?
No, no, which you written the Azure backup and Azure site, those kind of stuff. Okay, now you have answer.
Let me just reshare. Now, is it fine?
No, it's loading. It's just
Fine to me.
okay.
Okay. So what are the advantages you are going to get? The number one advantage you are going to get that storage management would be automatic. So I can say um, automatic storage management. When I say automatic storage management, that means what? Let's say, as I told you, that if you have a 15 GB recovery service vault, okay, and you want to store 16 GB data there, so immediately you can put that data, and it is going to increase automatically or decrease automatically. Okay, so that's the benefit you get. That storage management, whatever the storage required to store a particular backup into recovery service vault, so it can scale out and it can scale in automatically. Okay, so yeah, so if I talk about scaling, how much scaling you can do, so there is no limit for scaling, no limit for scaling. If you want to scale out or scale down, sorry, scale in, so you can do it as per your choice. Okay, you could have a different type of storage option as well. So you whatever the data you are putting into the Azure service vault, so by default that data would be encrypted. So data, I can say that backup data in Azure Service Vault, encrypted. And you know the benefit of encryption, right? What would be the benefit of encryption?
Security mainly.
Yeah, security mainly. So if you
Pen test to it's cheaper tech convert.
so you security and compliance, for example, someone is saying that for backup encryption is required and that you are not able to achieve on premises. However, nowadays whatever the on premises backup you have, backup software you have, whether that is a uh, Commvault or any other backup software. So whatever the backup software we have on the on premises, so there is a optional encryption, but here you are getting, default encryption. So if you don't disable the encryption, so by default all the backup data would be encrypted, and that is for the security and that is for the compliance as well. So let's say Azure resources itself, who is working for the Azure, they would try to access your data, but that data would be encrypted and they can't access because the key with you. Okay, so until they won't get um, encryption key, they can't decrypt that. However, that Azure in Azure policy, customer data cannot seen by any kind of support person, but also this is the advanced security, and your whatever the data you are putting there, that is by default encrypted. Okay, other thing, whenever you required recovery of the backup, okay, so there is no additional charges uh, required. Okay, so recovery is very fast. If I talk about in recovery part, data recovery, or restoration, if you just want to restore the data, okay, so for any data transfer, whether that is for restore or that is for the data upload into the recovery service vault, there is no charge for data transfer. So if you are transferring the data from, your backup data from VM to Azure service vault, sorry, recovery service vault, so this is a free of cost. That is the benefit you are getting, and this can use for long term retention as well. This can use for long term retention. Okay, so you can store data, backup data, you can store there for long term. Okay, when I talk about the storage option, which is recovery service vault, okay, so it could be two type. Okay, the storage could be recovery service vault storage could be two type. Let me just write over here. Option storage option you are going to get in the Azure multiple. Number one, you are going to get which is known as a LRS, and number two, you are going to get GRS. What is the LRS? This is stand for local redundant storage. Local redundant storage. You are going to get local redundant storage. What is this? This is going to replicate your data whatever the scale unit you are going to purchase. So in that scale unit, it is going to replicate your data 3 times. Okay. And when I say 3 times, so let's say you have 3 availability zone within the data center. So whenever you are putting the data into this recovery service vault, so in that recovery service vault, one copy is going to store into all 3 availability zone. I mean to say, so let's say I have taken a backup right here. This is my machine, which is on availability zone 1. And for this machine, I have put the backup into the LSR. Okay. So if you, sorry, LRS. So when we are putting the data into LRS, that is local redundant storage. So you know that in one data center we have 3 availability zone: availability zone 1, availability zone 2, and availability zone 3. This is nothing but this is a physical isolated data center within the data center itself. Okay, so let's say this is US East, and within this data center we would have a 1, 2, 3 data center. That is what, that is availability zone: availability zone 1, availability zone 2, availability zone 3. So when you are making LSR, okay, and putting the backup, let's say for this VM, you put the backup over here. Okay, so you know what would happen, there would be 3 copy would be created for the same backup over here and over here as well. So in any case this gets failed, you would be able to restore your data from here, or if this case get failed, you would be able to restore data from here. But what if entire data center gets failed? Then what happen? You would not get your data. Okay, and for that we have to use GRS, Global Redundant Services. Okay, so when you are using global redundant storage, okay, so on that cases your data is going to replicate into the peer region. So maybe you have a US, and in US you have 2 zone: US East and US West. So you have 2 zones. So whatever data you are going to put into this into the Azure recovery service vault, so that data is going to replicate on into the same region, or maybe peer region, I can say. So this is a global redundant storage. In local one, what is happening? Your data is going to replicate within the data center, but in the global, your data is going to replicate across the data center in the same region. Okay, so that's what the benefit you get when you have, when you are using cloud-based recovery services or cloud-based backup, especially in Azure. So you would be getting automatic storage management. That means if you want to scale up or scale down, sorry, scale out or scale in, so you can use. I mean, this would happen automatically. There won't be any limit for scaling. Okay, and your backup data within the Azure Service Vault would be encrypted. And data recovery and restore services, for recovery or restore service, there is no charges for data transfer as well, and you can choose it for the long term retention. Okay, anybody work on the data backup team? Have you worked on the backup?
No.
Okay, probably you would be knowing the challenges. What are the challenges when you are taking the backup, basically? Challenge is a taking a backup and managing the backup storage. That is a one of the challenge. Okay, especially data retention. So in if you are using Azure based things, so your data retention could be very long, and your data restoration or data backup is a faster, because if you are taking the data backup using Azure backbone for the Azure VMs, this is really very fast. Okay, now I would talk about how you can take the backup. I mean, what all the things that you can use for the backup. So basically, if I talk about taking the backup mechanism, basically, so it could be different types. Let me select them. So let's talk about backup mechanism. Backup mechanism. So how you can take the backup? So there are four methods that you can use for backup. The number one is, let me just write here. Backup mechanism you can use as a four type. The number one is basically you can use agent based. Agent based. Which agent you are going to use? You are going to use Mars agent. MARS. Mars agent. This Mars stand for Microsoft Azure Recovery Services. Number two, you can go with System Center. You can use a System Center. Number three, you can use Azure Backup Server. And number four, you can use Azure Infrastructure as a Services, and you can use virtual machine over there. Okay. So what happened in Azure Mars when you are using Azure Mars? So let me give you a scenario. So let's say you have a machine. This is a VM. In this VM, you have a C drive. Okay, and you just want to take the backup of this C drive. Okay, entire C drive. So what you are going to do? You are going to install a backup agent over here in this machine, a small software from Microsoft, and you can schedule the backup of what would be the source and what would be the destination. So on source you can select a C drive, and on destination you can select your Azure Service Vault. Sorry, Azure Storage Vault. Okay, so you can use Storage Vault services for the backup. Clear? So you just need to install an agent, and that agent you can download from the Microsoft. Install that agent on the machine where you just want to take the backup, and you can put the backup into the recovery service vault, RSV, which is known as a recovery service vault. You can put there. Okay, but there is a limitation on this. In a day you can just take 3 time backup. Per day it is just supporting 3 time backup. It is just supporting 3 time backup. Okay, and the benefit you are going to get, that for this you don't need to deploy any big infrastructure. Using individual VM, in individual VM itself you can install the agent and you can take the backup. Okay, and perhaps we are going to take do the practical of this one. The next we have uh, system center. Okay, so when you are going to use a system center backup, okay, so this is basically for the VM, and this system center backup you are going to uh, you can use this system center backup mechanism to take the backup of your virtual machine, and it is going to put that backup either on the local disk. The system center has the capability to put the backup on the local disk, and also it can put the backup on RSV, recovery service vault. So it can put the backup there as well. Okay, and then we have Azure Backup Server. It is working the same as a system service backup. Okay, it can take the backup of virtual machine. Okay, and it is very flexible. You can use this for the recovery services as well. So this is these two backup are the same type of backup. This one Azure ISVM. Basically what happen when you just want to take the backup of your data. So what you do, you deploy a machine, and from this machine you are initiating the backup for the destination for which you just want to take the backup. Okay, so for this what you required, a kind of backup gateway you required. So it is taking the backup of the data which you have either on premises or on the Azure. Usually in our case we are using this agent based backup a lot. Any question on this? Maybe practically you would be seeing this in much better way. So let me just clean this. Now we are going to talk about next one, which is auto scale.